Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We cover anything tragic related, any true horror story, we'll cover it here. So if that's your kind of content and you like that kind of stuff, then make sure you're clicking that subscribe button and make sure you're tapping that notification bell to be alerted when I release new content such as this. But in this week's video, we're covering a group of keen tourists that hired a company to drive and guide them through the sights and natural wonders of the Southwest America. They were all out enjoying a canyon in Arizona when suddenly it ended in tragedy. This is the nightmare in Antelope Canyon. Now our story begins in August of 1997, when a group hired an outdoors company named Trek America. This company used to offer US outdoor tours catering to young Europeans. The whole point was that people would pay the company to guide them through places of interest or potentially dangerous places within the Southwest. This tour set out from Denver and stopped at Lake Powell along the Arizona-Utah state line. The group at the time consisted of 10 people, ranging from 20 to 45. The person leading the group, his name was Pancho. He was 28 and he just started the job. This was actually his first solo guide. The group was reported to have traveled through several states, visiting some beautiful and otherworldly places. This kind of guided tour bus was for the avid adventurer, someone who wanted to push themselves and just wanted to experience the world. The group would drive to places and then collectively vote where they would explore. When they got to Arizona, they threw around a few locations such as the Grand Canyon and Havasu Falls, but in the end, the group voted that they would go to visit the Antelope Canyon, located in Navajo land east of Lechi. The scenic canyon itself is classed as a slot canyon. It's actually split into lower and upper reaches. Both, at the time of writing this, cannot be entered without a guide. It's a beautifully rare sight, especially with how large it is. It attracts photographers from all over the world. Now in 1997, the canyon had little restrictions. You could pay a small fee and enter without a guide. There was little to no warnings of the dangers, and the entrance was just aluminium ladders, not bolted to anything. We'll come back to that. Now Antelope Canyon was formed over a millennia by the erosion of the Navajo sandstone. This is caused by flash flooding, and rainwater, especially in monsoon season, runs into a huge basin above the canyon, which then flows at a fast rate downhill through the canyon to Lake Powell. As the entrance and length of the upper canyon are on ground level, you could literally just walk in, meaning it's more frequently visited by tourists and less dangerous. It's around 660 feet or 200 meters in length. While the lower canyon, located a few miles from the upper section, its entrance is not on ground level, meaning you have to descend. Not to mention, it's actually a lot more difficult of a hike. It's longer at 1,335 feet or 407 meters. It's also narrower and there's not even footing in all areas. While they voted, this is when the group decided they would visit the more challenging lower reaches. Pancho, the guide, he was not a fan of this idea. He had a strange feeling that something was not quite right, but as he was the guide and he was paid to do what they wanted, he obliged and said this was fine. So the group set off on the entrance. They were in good spirits, sun was shining, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. After some time, they parked up and the group of 10 trekked out to the Antelope Canyon. The entrance itself is conveniently right off the highway. It's a slash in the land around 80 feet deep or around 24 meters. When they got there, the group, they could see the amazing smooth sandstone walls, with light rays shining from above, a perfect time for photos. But examining the entrance, it was a lot tighter than they expected. Despite this, against their fear of tight spaces, they trundled down the ladder. Now as they did, 5 out of the group of 10 panicked and got claustrophobic. These 5 people climbed back out and waited in the tour bus. This would prove to be the best choice they made in their entire lives. The group lowered themselves into the canyon and were greeted by another group of 6 taking photos, making the number of people in the canyon at 12. Now the group slowly meandered through, in shock at the fascinating place they were in. It's truly a wonder. The group was wandering about, taking keepsake photos and really enjoying themselves. They thought what a brilliant idea it was to go here. The ripples and waves of the sandstone are just so unique. The guide was in front, leading the way, when all of a sudden, he stopped in his tracks. He looked over at the wall and it started shaking violently. His blood ran cold and his hair stood on end. He knew what this meant. Rock-hard sandstone was visibly shaking, and soon it was all around them. Sand was coming down from above, making visibility poor, and the next thing they heard was a massive, deafening roar. The entire group looked back and saw the water plummeting towards them at breakneck pace. They all saw it coming. They looked around, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from this brutal torrent of water that was heading towards them. Now, as the water had travelled, it had picked up a significant amount of debris. Logs, rocks, anything that was in its wake, it had picked up. It had also picked up the mud that was on the bottom of the ground too, making it quite thick, described, and I quote, as chocolate milkshake consistency. The water quickly reached the group and caused absolute havoc. It almost instantly reached waist height for everyone, and everyone was panicking, flailing around, trying to grab onto anything to stop them being pulled under. Some of the group waded their way back to the nearest ladder to escape this nightmare, but as they did, suddenly the aluminium ladder was swept away in the extreme currents. There was nothing bolting it to the wall, so the ladder just came loose. The rest of the group could see people being trapped under the ladder that was twisting, twirling, and contorting with the force of the water. It was tumbling down the pit as if it was nothing. At this point, the rest of the group knew there was no easy way out of the canyon. People were being swept under and everyone was screaming. Bodies were flopping and crunching against the walls with the current, and nobody could hold on. Now very quickly, the entire canyon was filled with water. Pancho, the guide, found himself against an outcrop, holding the last two of his group behind him against the wall. Only around 15 to 20 feet or 6 meters from the very top, but it was just out of reach. Now Pancho was previously a construction worker. He was built well and trying to hold on the best that he could to secure the two tourists. He was holding on for dear life. The current and depth of the water was increasing by the second. They were being thrashed with debris, mud in your eyes, can barely see anything. But in the struggle, Pancho turned and saw two men plummeting towards him, arms and legs flailing around, trying to grab onto something. Within a second, these two men hit the guide and caused him to lose his grip on the two tourists. He quickly managed to grab them and he held on for as long as he possibly could, but the current was just too strong. He could feel that he was close to being pulled by the current too, so he was forced to let go. He let go and held desperately onto the sandstone for a brief second. He made eye contact with the tourists, and just like that, they were gone. Pancho could do nothing. He had to watch the last of the three people of the group tumble down the slot at great speed, twisting and turning. Now that left Pancho on his own, holding on the best that he could, pretty much blinded by the water. This is when suddenly Pancho was dragged under the water by the current, twisting and turning, getting hit by debris and rocks. But Pancho had fast water training. He focused on staying calm and concentrated on staying on his back, making sure that his feet pointed downstream. Occasionally, he was able to grab a precious breath of air, only to dive into the water again, not knowing if this would be his last. Eventually, he was able to grab onto the wall again, and he held on for so long that his skin had begun to peel off. He looked around to see if there was any way out, and here he saw water rolling on the wall of an ester. He shimmied over and he felt his legs get grabbed by the current. The current was strong enough to propel him further than he usually would, and he thought he would be able to reach a ledge that was just out of reach. He was caught by the current and he flung in the air, and just like that, he caught onto the ledge and he was saved. He could see the water passing below him. He couldn't climb out, but at least he wasn't dead. Here he passed out on this rock, and that was the last thing he remembers.
One of the deadliest natural disasters in Arizona history. A massive flood filled the deep but narrow canyon within minutes, and those inside had no warning.
Within hours of the flood, several media helicopters and trucks arrived to document the tragedy. It took some time to piece together what had happened. Officers checked the cars left behind and spoke to personnel from the tour group to establish who had perished. Rescue crews were dispatched to try and help any survivors, but sadly they could not enter or start any recovery as the water continued to flow until 4 a.m. the next morning. Now, when they could eventually enter, here they first found Pancho clinging onto one of the ledges. He was naked, battered and bruised. He had an extreme amount of silt in his eyes and he was temporarily blinded from this. His skin was raw from the water current and some of it was missing entirely. A reporter likened him to being as if he had been the sole survivor of a plane crash. Now, he was evacuated and amazingly made a full recovery. But after a full week of searching through the canyons with cadaver dogs, the full death toll of this tragedy was totaled. A total of 11 people lost their lives on this tragic day. They are on screen now. My thoughts and condolences go out to their families. 7 French citizens, 2 US residents, a Briton and a Swede had lost their lives. A 20-year-old woman from France was the first body recovered from a side tributary of the canyon. Soon, 8 of the victims were found in Lake Powell, so they had washed all the way through the canyon and they had all drowned. Sadly, a French couple that were in the canyon that day, but not in the group, had left their 10 and 12-year-old children at a hotel in Page, where they had planned to return. But the night came and went, and they never did, leaving them in absolute panic, wondering what was going on. Nobody spoke French at the hotel, and eventually a translator was brought in to break the terrible news. 2 of the victims have actually never been located, although the debris fields are still occasionally searched, in hope that someday they will be located. After some investigation, it was found that 15 miles upstream, a huge storm broke out. Despite there being not a single drop of rain in the area that day, this caused the systems to flood entirely within minutes. Police did actually attend a road washout where water had flowed for some time due to the storm, but nobody was alerted downstream. Access restrictions were put in place and better safety measures were installed. Stairways were mounted to the walls to provide a sturdy escape route, a much better choice instead of loose ladders. And most importantly, there's now prominent flood warnings all over. Now, Pancho the guide, the sole survivor, went on to write a book about the event called Breathe For Me, Surviving the Antelope Canyon Tragedy. He has suffered from survivor's guilt ever since the event, knowing that the people that died were in his custody, were his responsibility. It's something that will take many, many years to come to terms with. So that was the story of Antelope Canyon. There's nothing redeeming about this. It is just true horror and true tragedy. Some of the ages of the people that had died in this accident were younger than me. And it's just really, really sad. But anyway, that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, if you like it, let me know in the comments below what you thought. Let me know what you didn't like. But I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.